role-playing throughout the history of video games, from the 1950s to the present. The history of video games goes about as far back as the early 1950s, when academic computer scientists began designing simple games for simulation as part of their research. Video gaming did not reach mainstream popularity until the 1970s and early 1980s, when video arcade games and gaming consoles such as joysticks, buttons, and other controllers, along with graphics on computer screens and home computer games, were introduced to the general public. Since the 1980s, with graphics and video gaming became popular form of entertainment and a part of modern popular culture in most parts of the world. One of the early games was called Space Wars and Pong. These was developed by computer scientists. Early arcade video games were developed from 1972 and 1978. During the 1970s, the first generation of home consoles emerged, including the popular game Pong and various clones. Systems such as the Atari, Odyssey, and the Commodore PET revolutionized how home system entertainment was conducted. These systems ran on a 1 MHz CPU and 8 kilobytes of RAM. That is 8,000 bytes of RAM. Games such as Asteroids, Space Invaders, Metroid, and Maze Wars were popular on those machines. In the 1970s was also an era of mainframe computer games. The golden age of arcade video games was in 1978 to 1982. The movie Pixels was based on 1981 video games. Video arcades with large graphic-decorated coin-operated machines were common at places such as malls, gallerias, restaurants, and many other venues. During the 1980s, gaming computers and early online gaming and handheld LCD games emerged. This era was affected by the video game crash of 1983. In 1983, the North American video game crash, known as the Atari shock in Japan, was a massive recession in the video game industry that occurred from 1983 to 1985. Revenues had peaked at around $3.2 billion in 1983, not adjusted for inflation, then fell to around $100 million by 1985, a drop of almost 97%. The shock nearly crashed the economy in Japan and almost dealt a fatal blow to companies such as Sega, Nintendo, Atari, and Sony. The 1980s saw games like Pac-Man, Zelda, Donkey Kong, Mario, and Final Fantasy. These games ran on third-generation 8-bit cartridges, introduced later Atari, Commodore models, and eventually Nintendo model, which began with the Game & Watch series, which had become Nintendo's first worldwide success in video game consoles. These consoles had a max CPU clock rate of 2 MHz and could run 8-bit games. Personal computer games took off as well during this period, with games such as Ultima, Fragger, Centipede, The Hobbit, James Bond, Goldfinger, as well as so many others, ran on an operating system MS-DOS, as well as older versions of Windows. However, in the 2000s, these games would become obsolete, and you cannot play them without an emulator. These games that were played on MS-DOS, some of them were 16-bit games, and these games alone was what drawing people into 16-bit gaming. Now, personal computers really took off in the early instances of online gaming in the form of the bulletin board system, also known to many personal computer users as the BBS. The bulletin board system is a system where a host computer allows multiple computers to connect to it and interact with other users in games such as Land of Devastation, also known as LOD, Usurper, Legend of the Red Dragon, also known as Lord, Barren Realms Elite, aka Bree, and Falcon's Eye. These games, as well as menus on the BBS, featured text graphics like ANSI, for example, in Terminal. You would have to require programs such as RIP Terminal or try BBS to use them. The BBS was first to introduce adult-only content as well, and also were the first to restrict content to certain users based on age or trust, using a rating system as well. It had an integrated mail system like the email, as well as a live chat. This system was popular up until the introduction of the internet. The BBS experienced a decline from the 1990s onward, However, a resurgence came in the form of Telnet, which allowed users to get on the internet and access BBSs straight from their browser, for those that still existed. As for the nostalgia, most BBSs remained online to this day, including not limited to the Gamer's Realm, the Black Knight's Dungeon, and Convolution BBS. Fourth generation consoles, which were 16-bit consoles running on 3.5 MHz CPU clock, emerged in 1987 and were discontinued in 1999. Consoles such as the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and the Neo Geo, among others, would feature games as well as the resurgence of Japanese culture, such as Sonic, Street Fighter II, Secrets of Mana, Illusion of Gaia, Secrets of the Stars, and sequels to 8-bit games such as Zelda, Link to the Past, Super Mario World, the Final Fantasy franchise, Contra 3, The Alien Wars, Gradius 3, and later Castlevania 4 as well as many others. While Nintendo enjoyed some dominance, and ultimately the Super Nintendo would outsell the Sega Genesis, but only after the Sega Genesis discontinued the Genesis system to focus on the next generation of consoles. One trait that remains peculiar to the fourth generation is the huge number of exclusive games. Both Sega and Nintendo were so very successful, and their consoles developed massive libraries of games. Both consoles had to be programmed in assembly to get the most out of them. A game optimized for the Genesis would take advantage of its faster CPU and sound clip, while a game optimized for the Super NES, aka Super Nintendo, or in Japan Super Famicom, would take advantage of its graphics and flexible, clean sound chip. Some of the game series, like Castlevania, saw separate system exclusive releases rather than attempt to port one game to disparate systems. When compact disc technology became available midway through the fourth generation, each company attempted to integrate it into their existing consoles in different ways. NEC and Sega released the CD add-on to their consoles in the form of a TurboGrafx CD and the Sega CD. Both were only moderately successful. The NEC released the Turbo Duo, which combined the TurboGrafx 16-bit and the TurboGrafx CD add-on, along with the Neo Geo CD allowing the company to release its games on a cheaper medium than the AES expensive cartridges. But it reached the market after Nintendo and Sega had already sold tens of millions of consoles each. Nintendo partnered with Sony to work on a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo, but the deal fell apart when they realized how much control Sony wanted. Sony would use their work with Nintendo as a basis for their PlayStation game console. While CDs became increasingly visibly part of the market, CD reading technology was still expensive in the 90s, limiting NEC's and Sega's add-on sales. The 1990s saw a resurgence in the decline of arcades and the transition to 3D video games. This improved handheld games and computer gaming. Computer gaming in the 1990s was reaching its peak. Games such as Doom, Wolfenstein, Heretic, Hexen, Diablo, and Dark Forces and Terminal Velocity, as well as Warcraft, revolutionized computer gaming, which allowed developers such as Intel, AMD, and Nvidia to take advantage of the surge in computer gaming. As computer games became more detailed and immersive, so did the strain on these games were putting on the computer. Intel, AMD, and Nvidia knew this, and competed to bring the personal computer gamer to the latest and greatest technology to combat the load of newer games that had to offer. Games such as Quake, which popularized the player versus player first-person genre, Quake 2, Hexen 2, and Unreal required an upgraded PC to handle the load. Some of these games were able to be run on Windows without MS-DOS. The old 386 and the 486 chips were replaced by chips such as the Athlon and the Pentium 2 and Pentium 3 processors. Graphic cards, RAM, and CPU and hard drives had to be changed out to handle loads for new games to be released. NVIDIA and AMD would begin what became known as the graphics card wars, which began in 1999 when NVIDIA developed the NVIDIA 256 GPU, which had 128 megabytes of dedicated video memory, up until present day. Not soon after, this gave rise to custom PCs, specifically designed to play the most immersive and graphic-intense games on the latest hardware available, with games such as the Elder Scrolls games, Unreal Tournament, Diablo 2, as well as 95% of all computer games back in the 70s and 2000s were exclusive to computers. Computers such as Commander Keen, Duke Nukem, Jazz Jackrabbit were exclusive to the computer, and were considered the computer versions of Contra, Sonic, and Mega Man, respectively. However, these few games were available on the console as well as the computer, such as SimCity 2000, Civilization games, as well as Doom, which was ported first to the Super Nintendo and then later the Nintendo 64. 16-bit console and 16-bit computer games were the most successful and most sought-after games in the late 80s up till the end of the 1990s. 3D games that ran on sprites as opposed to true 30 polygons ran on 16-bit systems. Doom was one example. Despite its popularity in the 1990s, it would be phased out by the 5th and 6th generation consoles. The 5th generation console, which included 32 and 64-bit units, was from 1993 to 2006. And during this era, mobile phone gaming emerged. 5th generation consoles began with the Atari Jaguar, released in 1993. Despite being the first console to introduce 3D graphics, Atari Jaguar never really took off in sales. The Nintendo 64 and the PS1 were competing in sales, often rivaled one another. It's not surprising since once Nintendo had a joint venture with Sony in order for Sony to develop a CD-ROM-like console. With the popularity growing with the 5th generation consoles, games such as Quake 64, GoldenEye, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, and Mario 64, as well as widely popular Mario Kart 64, brought in a new generation of gamers. Now, unfortunately, the 5th generation console would become obsolete by 1998 with the introduction of the 6th generation console. The 6th generation console emerged in 1998, and during this period, online gaming and mobile games became important. By this time, the bulletin board system became obsolete, and computer gaming was still cranking out highly immersive games, like Unreal Tournament, Quake 3 Arena, and the Elder Scrolls genre gained popularity. In 1998, the 6th generation console Sega Dreamcast was released, and it would soon be outcompeted by the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. Now, the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox had released the following games such as the Medal of Honor series, the early Call of Duty series, and the Halo series. They would all dominate the market for console games, while computer games such as the Warcraft series, the Age of Empires series, the Empire Earth series, and Diablo 2 and its clones, as well as Doom 3. The Elder Scrolls and Civilization games dominated the computer market. Not long after the 5th generation console running 64-bit games were discontinued after 2006, 7th generation consoles were being released. The 7th generation consoles has reigned from 2005 to 2012. This era was marked by huge development budgets for some games, some with having semantic graphics, as well as launching the top-selling Wii console, in which the user would control game actions with real-life movement with the controller. With the rise of PC gaming, casual marketed to non-gamers, and the emergence of cloud computing and video games, this era of gaming changed the way games were cooperatively played. Instead of playing with a fellow neighbor at your house or theirs, you could sit at home and play with your neighbor over the internet using a PlayStation Network or the Xbox Network. This online peer social media play allowed users to play games like Call of Duty, the Modern Warfare series, or Halo series, as well as other games, with other people around the world. And with the rise of online gaming also gave rise to the negative aspect of online gaming, which would be hacking and cheating among peers. Attempting to gain advantages over others, the dominance or in-and-out retribution also gave rise to countermeasures to stop the grieving of players. Online computer games were notorious for exploitation, cheating, botting, or hacking. With the rise of Ultima Online and RuneScape, botting and automatic resource generation for users who were offline became an issue for developers. Also, spam and scamming became rampant as well, scamming users of valuable items in-game, and the ban hammer, as users would call it, was heavily enforced when World of Warcraft debuted. And the same went for RuneScape. With the popularity of the first-person shooters at the time high in late 2000s and early 2010s, games like Blacklight, Crysis, Combat Arms, and Counter-Strike defined online first-person shooters. But like RuneScape and World of Warcraft, hacking, botting, cheating, and exploitations also plagued online first-person shooters. This gave rise to the infamous QQ, which refers to the accuser as the whiner. Some players who were actually skilled faced off against new and inexperienced players, and would often lash out at skilled players with accusations of cheating. sometimes getting wrongly accused players of ban. Now, players who accused others of being cheaters, whether or not they are, would be a mystery, would be told, QQ more, or cry more noob. These quotes would give rise to online gaming terms. When online gaming gave rise to these terms such as QQ, noob, newbie, nooblet, leet, elite, script kiddies, and etc. These terms for online gaming were used by many different generations of video gamers. It would not be uncommon for a 5-year-old kid to call someone who is 24 or 30 years old gaming as a noob or as a hacker. With the rise of banning players, as well as the rise of white hats, known as hackers who go after other hackers, and the situation began to escalate. Not long were people's accounts being stolen by being scammed by others, or people were gaining advantage over others through hacking and modding, with other people hacking and modding to combat the other hackers. This became a major problem through online gaming. However, all was not lost through general sportsmanship, as good positive sportsmanship and aspects of online gaming gave rise to terms and expressions such as GG, which means good game, NS for nice shot, GJ for good job, congrats, and the most famous saying of all came from World of Warcraft, Leroy Jenkins. With online gaming popularity at its peak in the early 2010s, gave rise to clones to World of Warcraft such as Last Chaos, Repels, and Elder Scrolls Online, Guild Wars, and many more. The term grind, which meant constantly play to generate experience and resources to obtain higher goods or levels, and the term parties and clans became popular. Even online games would adopt them, which allowed you to form a guild, a clan, a party, a team, or etc., to raid dungeons, form leagues, play in tournaments with other teams, guilds, clans, or parties. This would also give rise to a new professional sport called esports. Professional sports like the NFL, MLB, NHL, and NBA dealt with football, baseball, and hockey, and basketball respectively, with esports becoming a so-called professional sport. Those who were merely skilled players from each country would compete in gaming tournaments, and yes, there was even a movement to push esports into the Winter Olympics. This has been met with criticism and skepticism as well, even though praised by some. By 2013, the 8th generation consoles emerged, including the Nintendo's Wii U, Nintendo 3DS, Microsoft's Xbox One, and Sony's PlayStation 4 and Sony's PlayStation Vita. These consoles could bring immersion to the extreme, and a whole new level, no pun intended of course. But games such as the Doom reboot and the recent Call of Duty releases like Call of Duty Advanced Warfare and Destiny could all be played on the 1080p resolution, also known as Full HD, at 60 frames per second, and some consoles going as far as upgrading their consoles to allow native 4K support, which is 4 times the resolution of 1080p. Computer gaming genre by 2013 had already starting to mod games like Skyrim with 4K textures, as featured on the Nexus mod site. Native 4K gaming is becoming popular in 2017, with the PS4 introducing its Pro version as well as the Scorpio coming out to allow consumers to experience 4K gaming resolution on a 4K television set. Computer gamers, however, had to wait until recently to be given 4K monitors to play their games in 4K resolution. The introduction of multi-core CPUs and multi-core GPUs with high amounts of RAM as well as solid-state drives with terabyte storage allowed for 4K resolution games to be played on systems smoothly. While 8K resolution is still in its infancy, virtual reality has been gaining ground in recent years. Although thought to be extinct with the Virtual Boy in 1995, virtual reality gaming really took off in the mid-2010s. With this gave rise to graphics processors that could handle such a huge load, such as the NVIDIA 1080 Ti. For example, with all that hardware, the computer gaming, which had been in decline for recent years, has been holding a large market share in Asia and Europe for decades, and continues to grow due to digital distribution and virtual reality gaming. Since the development of widespread consumer use of smartphones, mobile gaming has been driving the sector for games as they can reach people formerly uninterested in gaming and those unable to afford support for dedicated hardware, such as video game consoles or computer game consoles. Games such as Pokemon Go and Candy Crush made mobile gaming so popular that reports of crashing on servers that house these mobile games began to surface. Fast forward to today, gaming has evolved from its 8-bit Pong to the 4K VR Doom reboot and soon-to-be Destiny sequel. With the rumors about Call of Duty rebooting its franchise, old games that once played on older generation consoles are getting new life in remasters, reboots, and re-imaging to be played by those who love the older games, but to look at them and play them at high resolutions and graphics while maintaining somewhat of that nostalgic feel. Thank you for watching and subscribing to Iron Tusk 341. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Iron Tusk 341 for more documentaries, gameplay videos, and virtual novels which could make their appearance later on this channel. And also support my page on Patreon as well. Thank you.